War does not begin with a shot. It begins with a thought quietly planted in your head, and the most frightening part is that you do not realize at first that it is not yours. Psychological war does not scream, does not explode, and leaves no craters. It slowly changes what you believe until your own reality starts working against you. "We haven't lost yet," a soldier said, staring at his phone in a dark dugout. "But everyone around is already talking, as if it's only a matter of time, as if resistance is pointless, as if we're the ones to blame for being broken." No one answered immediately. The words he had read had already done their work. They cut deeper than fear of death, because death is an ending, while doubt is a process. It eats away at will, trust, and the ability to tell truth from convenient lies. "Have you seen the news?" another finally said, his voice too calm. "They say we've been abandoned, that command is lying, that resistance only delays the inevitable. And if that's true, maybe it's better to surrender now than die for nothing." There was still no battle, no attack, but something had already cracked. An army that begins to doubt the meaning of its own existence becomes vulnerable before the enemy raises a weapon. That is the goal of psychological war, not to kill the body, but to break the decision. "This isn't just news," a third said with anger full of despair. "It's a weapon that fires words, and if we believe it, they win without ever stepping onto the battlefield." But the words were already working. Fakes disguised themselves as facts. Propaganda posed as concern. Control of information pretended to be protection. Soldiers began fighting not only the enemy but their own thoughts, which no longer obeyed orders. "The worst part," the first said quietly, staring into the darkness, "is that I don't know what's real anymore. And while I'm trying to figure it out, someone has already gained time, broken confidence, and done their job without a single shot." That is when it becomes clear that the first act of modern war happens in the mind. When control over information is lost, when fear and doubt become stronger than trust, an army can be defeated before the battle, simply by being convinced that it has already lost. The flow of words never stopped for a single minute, because psychological warfare knows no pauses. It works around the clock, rolling in waves of messages, comments, leaks, and pseudo-testimonies, and each of them has one goal: to tear apart bonds of trust faster than shells ever could. "Yesterday, they were writing that we were holding on," the soldier said, nervously scrolling through the feed. "And today, the same channels are screaming that we're already surrounded, that the commanders have fled, that no help is coming. I don't understand how the truth can change this fast, if it's even the truth at all." Another laughed sharply without any joy, because here laughter was not a defense but a symptom. "It doesn't change," he replied heavily. "They don't need truth, they need exhaustion. Because when you're worn down, you stop checking, you stop analyzing, you stop fighting, and then any lie sounds like relief." Fakes didn't come only from outside. They appeared inside, passed in whispers, overgrown with details, becoming something everyone knows. And that was the most dangerous part, because psychological warfare wins not when you read a lie, but when you start spreading it yourself. Even with the disclaimer, "I'm not sure," but "they deliberately show defeats," someone said with anger bordering on panic. "They never show that we held, that we pushed back. Because success gives strength, they need exhaustion. They need us to believe there's no point anymore." Information control worked like a noose, tightening slowly but inevitably. And when sources began to disappear and alternative voices fell silent, the silence became just as aggressive as the lies, because in it, everyone was left alone with their fears. "The scariest part," the soldier said, staring into the darkness of the dugout, "is that I no longer know who to trust. And if I trust no one, How do I fight? How do I hold on when reality itself is crumbling under my feet? And it is here that the second act reveals its true cruelty, because psychological warfare does not break you instantly. It wears you down. It steals strength drop by drop until the soldier begins to doubt not the order but himself, and an army that has lost confidence in its own reality becomes vulnerable long before the enemy makes the first physical move. The breaking point did not come at the moment of attack, but in the minute when soldiers began arguing not about positions, but about what was actually happening. Because psychological warfare reaches its peak when reality is no longer shared, when everyone lives in their own version of the truth. And this divergence eats a unit from the inside faster than any encirclement. "You can see they're throwing us away," one said sharply, almost with hatred. "All the channels are saying it. All the comments are the same. All the insider sources line up. And if we refuse to admit it, we're just blind fanatics who will be used and discarded. And have you considered that this is exactly what they want from you?" Another replied, clenching his fists as if he were holding not a weapon, but his own certainty. "For you to believe that all sources have suddenly aligned, because someone aligned them. So you explain defeat to yourself before the battle even starts. The argument had no winner, because both were speaking from pain and exhaustion, not from lies. And that was the most frightening part, because psychological warfare doesn't work against fools. It works against thinkers, against those who look for logic, because logic is easiest to replace with half-truths. "I no longer feel certainty," a third admitted, his voice breaking. But he didn't look away. "Not because I'm afraid of the enemy, but because I don't know if that we still exists, the one worth holding on to. Because if everyone sees a different picture, who exactly am I protecting?" The words hung in the air heavier than smoke, because they touched the core. Trust, and trust is the framework of any army, and when it cracks, even the best equipment and numbers become empty shells. "That's how they win," someone said quietly, with an understanding that hurts, "not when we retreat, but when we stop believing each other because weapons can be lost, positions can be retaken, but if we lose our shared reality, we've already lost, even while standing in place." And in that moment it became clear that the third act of psychological warfare is not mass fear or panic, but fracture, when doubt becomes personal, when everyone starts believing they see more than the others. And that is when an army stops being whole, because it is broken not by gunfire, but by a question with no shared answer. What of all this is true? And can we still trust each other when information itself has become the battlefield? At some point, commanders realized that gunfire was secondary. Orders were being carried out more slowly, not because of fear of death, but because of fear of being wrong. That fear paralyzes more than shelling ever could. A soldier who does not trust information does not trust orders, even when they are correct. "I don't know if this is a trap," an officer said, staring into the darkness ahead of the positions. "Online, they're saying this maneuver already failed elsewhere, that the enemy is waiting for us, that this is pointless. And if I give the order now, and they were right, I'll lead people to their deaths." No one answered immediately. In that silence, everyone was weighing not the risk of battle, but the risk of trust. This was a new battlefield, where mistakes were measured not in meters or casualties, but in shattered confidence that could not be restored with a single command. "They're playing on our responsibility," another officer said with anger, close to despair. "They want us to stop ourselves, to decide not to act, because inaction feels safer than action under uncertainty." The soldiers waited, and that waiting was poisonous. Every minute without a decision created space for new rumors, new confirmations, new doubts. Psychological war used that time as precisely as artillery uses coordinates. "I'm starting to think," someone whispered, "that even if we win the battle, we've already lost something more important. We no longer act as one. We keep looking at screens as if that's where permission to move forward is decided." Attempts to restrict information only created new fear. Where information disappeared, imagination worked faster than facts. Control began to look not like protection, but like confirmation of the worst suspicions. "If they're hiding the truth," a soldier said coldly, "then the truth must be even worse. And that makes me afraid not of the enemy, but of my own side." This was the fourth act of psychological war, the critical point where weapons were still in hands and positions still held, but trust was falling apart. Without trust, an army becomes just a group of armed people, vulnerable not to force, but to constant whispering that they know nothing for sure, and that every decision may be part of someone else's script. When the moment to act finally came, it was not the amount of weapons or the level of training that proved decisive, but whether people could trust each other again, because psychological warfare does not seek total destruction. It only needs you to doubt at the exact moment when a decision must be made. "I don't know everything," the commander finally said, his voice hoarse but steadier than before. "And I know there is lies, half-truths, and fear all around us. But if we don't trust at least each other right now, then no truth will save us later, because we won't lose a battle. We will lose the ability to stay together." Those words did not erase doubt, but they restored something more important: direction. Psychological warfare wins where people freeze, and any movement, even a risky one, breaks its script, which is built on paralysis. "They wanted us to break without a shot," a soldier said quietly. "They wanted us to explain our own defeat to ourselves before it even became real. And now I understand that the biggest battle wasn't out there. It was here, in our heads." And even when the fight began, even when shots were fired, it became clear that the real ending had happened earlier, at the moment when people decided not to let information control their will. Because psychological warfare does not end when fakes disappear, but when they stop determining actions. "We don't know the whole truth," someone said with a bitter smile. "But we know what we are standing for, and that is enough to keep us from falling apart." The enemy did not vanish. Propaganda did not stop. Information control did not dissolve. But its influence weakened because an army that understands it is being pressured through fear and doubt becomes more resilient, even if it is tired and lacks the full picture. The ending of this story is not about victory on the battlefield, but about the survival of will. Psychological warfare is dangerous precisely because it is invisible, and if it is not recognized, it can break an army before the first shot is fired. And if there is one main lesson, it is simple and harsh. In modern war, whoever controls your fears almost controls your decisions. But the moment you become aware of that pressure and hold on to trust between people, psychological weapons lose their power, because they only work as long as you are fighting yourself.